Hebrews, if you will. We'll begin there in just a moment. So good to see each of you this morning and grateful for your presence. Grateful that you've chosen to be here. We have a very good crowd. I have thoroughly enjoyed being with you this morning and singing together. I don't know if it's just me, but singing seemed unusually good this morning, and I appreciate that. I very much appreciate the words that Victor spoke to us before we participated together this morning in the supper of the Lord. I thought they were very good and very directed toward us, helping us think about the things that we need to think about. I have appreciated that particular part of our service a great deal since we have begun to do that, and it means a lot to me personally to have someone help me continue to set my mind in order as we think about taking the Lord's Supper. So I appreciate all the men who help us do that from time to time. I am going to be gone next Sunday. I begin a meeting in Springdale, Arkansas next Sunday, and Beth will be joining me there. So we'll be away from you for a few days. I look forward to that. It's the first time I've been at that particular church. That's a church that Bob and Billy Bolton were at for a long time. They did a lot of good there for many years. And so I've known about them a lot because of the work that they did at that church. And of course, Billy's with us here now. But I'm grateful for them and all they continue to do there, and look forward to being with that church next week. Tonight, our young men will be speaking for us and be helping us as we worship our God, and I look forward to that as well. So I hope you'll make your plans to be back here tonight at 5 p.m. In John the 17th chapter, Jesus said this, "I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one." Jesus offers a prayer for his disciples, that they were to remain in the world, but they were not to be of the world. I'm going to suggest to you this morning that while he spoke to his disciples, that's exactly what he wants from us. And furthermore, I'm going to suggest to us that that's very hard. I think it's extremely hard to do, and I want to share with you this morning some reasons why that's hard. And I want to tell you before I begin the thrust of this lesson that this lesson is, first of all, for me. I'm just going to tell you that right up front. The things that I'm going to talk to you about today are needed by me first. Sometimes the perspective that we have about our lives is not what it ought to be. But there is a homelessness that is distinctly that which a Christian has. It is a homelessness that I think is many times a disconnect for us. This morning in Patrick's prayer, which I appreciated, he said this, and as soon as he finished the prayer, I wrote this down in my notes. He said, and I believe this is verbatim, "Be mindful of this home, be mindful of the home you've prepared for us." That stuck out in my mind this morning because that's exactly what I'm talking about this morning. Help us to be mindful. I'm going to tell you something. I think that's a hard thing for us to do, like God intends for us to do it. And that's really the essence of what I want to talk with you about this morning. Most of us, I think, understand the concept of homelessness abstractly. But I want you to notice from this passage in Hebrews 11, I want you to notice how these Old Testament characters, if you will, these Old Testament people, how the Hebrew writer says they understood what homelessness was, and I want you to look at some characteristics about it that help us focus. Now, let me say this to kind of set a little bit more context. I think as you get older, this becomes clearer. The advantage for a young person to understand this is unbelievable. I think sometimes things have to happen in life for a younger person, and you can classify that as however you wish, but the younger you are, the more difficult the concept is, I think, and the more unconnected or disconnected the concept is. I'm not suggesting you can't know it, but I'm suggesting this. All of us need to have a clear understanding of what we're talking about, what the Hebrew writer is talking about, because the people that he talked about, they did understand it. That's what we ought to have. All of us need, I think, what we're going to talk about this morning. This, of course, is a great chapter of faith. And I think what this chapter does, it shouts out something about faith that all of us need to understand in a very clear way. Verse 13 says that they all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared a city for them. I want you to look at the language. Not having received the promises, but having seen them from afar off. You get that? Not having received them, but yet having seen them. They see the fulfillment. I want to ask you a question. How in the world could Abraham see anything? How could he see this fulfillment? And I think the idea is he was convinced of the reality of what God had told them. He was convinced of the reality of what God had told them and that God was keep His promises. So it says, even though they had not received them, they see them. They see them from afar off. And they embrace them. They embrace those promises. You embrace something that's dear to you. You embrace something that you have a strong affinity for. And it says they confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims. Isn't that interesting language to you? They confessed. We think of confess, we think of sin. Or we think of the fact that we need to confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. The Hebrew writer says they confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims. What does that mean? I think it means something else that Patrick prayed about this morning in his prayer. He said, help us to have, you remember this word in his prayer? Help us to have the perspective of looking for a home in heaven. He said perspective. Maybe you remember that. You may not remember what Victor talked about a month ago, but maybe you remember the prayer. See, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about having a perspective. And verse 14 says, for those who, look at it, for those who say such things. Have you ever thought about what he said there? For those who say such things, they talk about it. It's not for those who think such things, it's those who say such things. Those who say such things, when they talk about it, they make it clear. They declare plainly that they seek a homeland. That's what they're looking for. They make it clear or declare plainly. May I just tell you this? I hope this happens to you. When you take a passage like this that's so common and you look at it again, and you look at the words and you don't just run through it, but you run through it and you read through it and you think, what is he saying? We're talking about things here, not having received the promises, that they see them, they embrace them, they confess them. And they say plainly, they speak plainly, they declare plainly. I mean, I find it, this is the fun part to me about study. The deeper you get into it, you're looking at words and seeing words that say, this is deeper than just they have faith. It's not just about having faith, my friends. It's about having a faith that in essence you already see. It's almost as if you have a faith that has already received the promises. Now I know faith at one time, when the Lord comes back, I know faith will be sight and I know it will change. But I'm going to tell you, what Abraham and those others who are listed in Hebrews 11, what they saw it. They believed it. They didn't just think, well, I hope this happens. No. They declared plainly. They said it. In Genesis 24:7, it said that Abraham, listened to this, spoke of the promises. Genesis 48:21, Jacob spoke of the promises. Genesis 50:24, Joseph spoke of the promises. 1 Chronicles 29:15, David spoke of the promises. Do words like confess and say and spoke expression? Doesn't that say, doesn't their language identify them? Doesn't what they talk about identify? May I ask you a question? How often do you talk about your perspective in life to other people? How often do you talk about it with your spouse or with your friends? How often do you talk about that? It seems to me that what's happening here is these were people who not only thought it, but they talked about it, spoke about it. It wasn't just something that they felt. This is a powerful statement about faith. They talked about their perspective. And verse 15 says, they truly, that they had in mind a country from which they had come out. They would have had opportunity to return. So he's saying if what they had thought about was some homeland, some physical homeland, they could have gone back. That's not what they were talking about. Had it been something other than a spiritual homeland, they could have gone back to Ur. They could have gone back to Haran. They could have gone back to these other places where they had come from. But that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about a spiritual homeland. And then verse 16 is one of those verses that I was referring to when I said, when you just stop and think about that it just kind of changes how you look at it. They desire better, that is, a heavenly country. And then it says, therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. If I ask you this morning, give me one verse that has the word ashamed in it, I know which verse you'd all quote it. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. I would have done the same thing. Why don't you look at this? Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God. That's powerful. That is a powerful statement. Because of their faith, God was not ashamed to be called their God. Ashamed is a harsh word. You ever been ashamed of anything you've done? You ever been ashamed of something you've done to the point where you just don't want anybody to know about it, and when they find out about it, you just kind of go into you don't want anybody to talk to you about it because you're ashamed of what you've done. Listen, that's a harsh word. It's intended to create the idea of being sorrowful for what you've done. But this passage goes to the other extreme and says, God is not ashamed of those who live by faith. And because God is not ashamed, he has prepared a city for them. I want you to think about city. A city in the Old Testament times was a place of safety. A city differed from a village in that a city had a fortified wall around it. When you go back and look at the Old Testament stories and it talks about the wall, the fortified wall, that was there to identify the fact that it was a city. It wasn't a village. It was a city. It had a fortress there. It was something which was able to keep bad things out. It's a place of safety. It was the center of power of a kingdom, like a capital. It's where the city is. In Alabama, that's Montgomery. That's where the power center of the kingdom of Alabama is, if you will. That's what the city was in the Old Testament. It's where the king lives. It's people live in close proximity there. It's unlike a rural residence where it may be miles apart from places. And while we may like to live in the country, as I call it, or we may like to live out away from the city, the idea of city tells us that we have close fellowship with citizens and the king. In your Bibles, look at Hebrews 12 and verse 22. I don't think I've put a slide on there, but Hebrews 12 and 22 tells us that you have come to the what? The city of the living God. Chapter 11 and verse 10 tells us that Abraham waited for the city with foundations whose builder and maker is God. May I suggest this to us this morning about these verses? They had not seen heaven, but seeing it, in other words, faith being made sight, was the absolutely only thing left. Everything that they had wanted in their faith was accomplished, except they just hadn't seen it. And in essence, in their minds, in their faith, they had seen it. I want to ask you a question this morning. Is your faith so strong that in essence you've already seen heaven? Isn't that a powerful thought? Is your faith so strong that it's not the seeing of it that's really going to, while that's going to be great, but your faith is so strong and my faith is already so strong, it's as if we've already seen it. We haven't received the promises yet, like Abraham, but in essence we've seen it because our faith is just that it is so strong. Now let me get back to why the concrete experiences are so hard to have. I want to ask you, I want to think about that by asking this question. Do you always fill out a place in the world? Or is this world home to you? It's a significant question. You say, well, Kenny, this is my home. Therein lies the problem, folks. Therein lies the problem for me and for you. Until we come to grips with the reality that this is only sojourning territory, we will feel disoriented and disappointed. Let me say that again. Until we come to grips with the reality that this is only sojourning territory, we will feel disoriented and disappointed. I don't care who you are this morning. I don't care how old you are. If you don't understand that the reality is we're only here and we're passing through, you're going to be disappointed. Your whole life, you're going to be disoriented. And my guess is that's what's happening this morning. If you don't have this kind of faith, you may be saying, well, I enjoy some things, but it doesn't give you the kind of hope that you need. Let me show you practically what is not our world. I just want you to think about this with me this morning. And here's what I want you to do. Think about how important, the importance that we put on all of these things, but think about the fact that it's not our world. Our frail bodies. Our frail bodies are not our home. Right now, they betray us. Turn over to Romans, the 8th chapter. I want you to look at a passage in Romans 8. I'm beginning in verse 18. Paul would say this, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope." The Creator did that. We sinned and began the process, but the Creator wanted us to understand our bodies are not our home. And I think it's great that we try to take care of our bodies and try to take care of our physical ailments. That's exactly what I think we ought to do. But the fact of the matter is that the futility of aging and disease and disability started when sin entered the world. And it's been that way ever since, and it's going to be that way, according to 1 Corinthians 15, until we're given perfected bodies. May I suggest to all of us, we ought to be concerned about it, but don't let it weigh on you. Don't let it weigh on you. There are people in this assembly this morning whose bodies are about done. You know who those people are? All of us. It's all of us. Our body's about done. It's a lot of it. It's about done. It's not where my hope is. My hope's not in my body. Someday we'll all have perfected bodies. That's the perspective that we look forward to. You see that? Our home is not our world. Our physical home is not our world. There's no idyllic location or home improvement that we'll ever make that will make what we have on this earth our homes. Beth and I love our home at 212 Knightsbridge Road. But that's not home. That's a house. That's a temporary residence that we live in, but it's not home. Maybe in a small sense, but it's not really home. It's sure not heaven for me. I like it. I like some things about it, but it's not home. Let me tell you something else that's not our world. Our marriages aren't our world. Marriage, I read this week. I thought this was great. Marriage is a momentary parable of the permanence of Christ in the church. Isn't that great? Marriage is a momentary parable about Christ in the church. That's what Ephesians 5 tells us. But I want to suggest something to you. Even the best earthly marriages are defective parables. Am I right about that? As good as your marriage is that what you want heaven to be? Is that what you want it to be? Oh, I've got a great marriage, Kenny, and I'm glad that you do. I do too. But I can tell you right now, if you ask my wife, hey, how about you want to make that heaven? She'd say, absolutely not. And neither would I. Marriage is all in. Marriage is all in. And if they end the way God intends for them to end, they end when death does part us. Unfortunately, some end before that. But they're going to end. That's not what life is. It's not what my world is. My world's not my children. I raise my children to leave. I raise my children to live their life, and then they raise theirs to live their life, and they leave. As much as I love my children, and as much as sometimes they disappoint, or as much as they make me feel good, they're not my life. They're not my world. I don't want that. They don't want that. Our friendships are not our world. Well, most of us, if not all of us, we have good friends. Some of my dearest friends on earth are sitting in this assembly. But I don't want you to be heaven for me. You got some flaws just like I got some flaws. I'll tell you something else that's not our world. Our local church is not our world. As important as this local church is to us, and it is important to us, as good as and helpful as it is, it'll never be heaven. I wouldn't want it to be heaven. I think in a sense it gives us an idea of heaven, but is what we have here what you want heaven to be? I don't think so. And finally, let me suggest this. Your vocation is not what your world's about. We prepare for work, then we do it only to find out it's not a permanent solution to life. We work ourselves to death. What difference is it going to make? You can work, and what difference does it make? It's just work. What then is our world? That's the question. What is our world? It is a better homeland. Hebrews 11 says, for those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. I'm going to suggest to you this morning and to me, that's what we have to do. I love my friends. I love my kids. I love my wife. I love my church. I love my work. I love my health. But I don't want that to be what it's about. C.S. Lewis said this in Mere Christianity. I love this statement. He says, if I find within myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. Amen? And amen. Does anything satisfy you in this world? Anything at all satisfy you? If I find within myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. That's exactly right. That's what I do. That's what I try to do. How do we attain this longing then for a city? How do we do what the Hebrew writer says those did? I'm going to suggest this. We need to live free and travel light. Live free. Let me mention this. I'm just going to read this out of my notes because the way I wrote it's the way I want to say it. If you don't burden your worldly experiences with the expectation of making them your home, then disappointment won't be so heavy and you'll be able to lay aside the weight of cynicism. Did you get that? If you don't burden your worldly experiences with the expectations of making them your home, then disappointments won't be so heavy and you'll be able to lay aside the weight of cynicism. I love that. Or in essence, travel light. Do you remember back when you used to fly on airplanes and they let you carry on 12 bags? You remember that? You know, you could check in 15 bags and, you know, carry on 4 and all that. Now what do? You ought to see me try to fly somewhere to preach for a week. You ought to see what's in my bag. Now, I may check one on, but I'll tell you what, I go as light as I can. I'm going to take a sports jacket usually, maybe something like this. This is a little heavier, but I'm going to take something that goes with 17 pairs of pants, and I'm going to just change it up a little bit as I go. I'll take a few different ties, but I'm not taking what I used to take. I've cut that. Sometimes, believe it or not, sometimes I go and I don't check anything in, and I know you go, well, you're a big guy. Your clothes are going to be big. Well, that's true, but I travel light. I might take a carry-on in a suitcase, but I travel light. And what happens is that travel's easier. It's easier. I may not have what I need always when I get there, but I've worked it so that now when I go, I can do that. That's what it is. Travel is easier. That's what the Hebrew writer's saying. Don't burden yourself with all this other junk that you burden yourself with in your life. He's not saying that that's unimportant. He's saying don't burden yourself with all of that. Travel light. And remember his words in John 14. Jesus told his disciples, what did he say? I go to what? Prepare a place for you. I know he's talking to his disciples, but you know, if he's preparing a place for them, he's preparing a place for me. So what do we need to do? We need to lighten up. Now, if I ask you, now what passage comes to your mind? Most of you'd say this. Come to me, Jesus said. All you who labor and are heavy laden. See what that is? It's baggage. That's not just a carry-on. That's 2 or 3 suitcases. That's baggage. And Jesus said, you need to come to me if you're laboring and if you're heavy laden. I will give you rest. Now he says, you got to do something. You got to take my yoke upon you. That's the idea of putting the yoke of Christ upon us, upon around our neck, and learn from us, from him. I'm gentle and lowly in heart. I'm going to put something on you, but it's not burdensome for you. It's helpful for you. It's going to relieve this heaviness, this heavy ladenness that you have, this labor that you have. It's going to remove that. What will happen? He said, you'll find rest for your soul. And then Jesus said this, my yoke is easy. Yoke is easy and a burden is light. Jesus' is. The disconnect is the hard part. When I stop and think about what my life is and how in the day-to-day activities and all of those things that maybe we think are life, all of those things are important. They're all important. But it's not our life. Our life is something that we look forward to. It's something that, for the most part, we can already see. Now, I want to ask you a question this morning. If you'll start with that perspective, won't that help you today and tomorrow and next week? Won't that help you? You start with that? The reason for this lesson this morning is because that's what I need to hear today. I needed to hear it. Don't get encumbered with the things in life that just weigh me down, but have my focus upon what Jesus can do for me. Well, I hope the lesson's been helpful to you, because I can tell you what, it's helpful to me. But the invitation that we just read from Matthew 11 is the Lord's invitation. He does say, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. When I read that, I don't understand why everybody's just not falling all over themselves to respond to the gospel. I don't. It's amazing to me that so few people ever respond to the gospel. Isn't it to you? Isn't that kind of amazing? That the greatest thing that a person needs, so few people want. It's as if they don't care. But it's not about everybody today, it's about you. Do you care? Do you want to respond? Are you willing to open your heart to the very thing that Jesus Christ can do for you, which is save you from your sin and give you a life that is different from any other life you've ever thought about having? But you've got to respond to Him. You've got to decide for yourself if that's what you want. Let me tell you from experience, it's the greatest thing that I ever did when I decided to obey the gospel. And having the freedom to live by faith and having the freedom to live as God wants me to live, not always perfectly by any means, but in a manner that's gives me that peace that I think everybody wants. And that's what my words this morning can offer you. I can't offer it to you, but the words do. The power of God can save you. So we're going to sing this invitation song. And if you're willing to respond to the gospel, we'd love to help you in whatever way we can, as we stand and as we